This year, just your sister mom texted. No explanation, no apology, just erasing me with a line of cold words on a glowing screen. I stared at it, and for a moment it felt like every forgotten birthday, every empty seat where my parents should have been, every letter I sent from Afghanistan that never got answered. They didn't know I owned a 2.5 acres estate in Wyoming. They didn't know I had the power to build my own table. So I invited everyone else. When the photos went online, the calls wouldn't stop. I'm Zinnia Carver, and this is my story. It's not just about family, it's about being erased and then fighting to exist on my own terms. Before I share it with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes knowing someone is listening makes all the difference. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. And if my story resonates with you, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps me keep sharing these moments, and maybe together we'll remind the world that no one deserves to feel invisible. The text came in just as the sun dropped low over the Absaroka Range, pouring gold across the wood floors of Cedar Hollow's kitchen. My phone buzzed, and when I opened the group chat, my mother's words lit up the screen like a blade. This year, just your sister's family. No explanation, no apology, just a cold dismissal packaged in politeness, as if erasing me from the 4th of July celebration was a formality, not cruelty. I stared at the reflection in the kitchen window, the glass staring back at me with a hollow kind of truth. I wasn't considered part of the family anymore. If I was honest with myself, I hadn't been for years. Every wound bloomed back at once when I was 13 and left standing alone on the curb after basketball practice because Mom forgot me for Serena's school fashion show. When I was 10, holding my volcano science project in front of empty bleachers because Dad was busy watching Serena compete for a crown she'd win anyway. When I wrote long letters home from Afghanistan describing the cockpit sky, only to be met with silence, while my teammates received care packages from their families. The only package I ever got came from my grandfather Theo cookies, wrapped in wax paper thick wool socks, and a note scribbled in his bold hand, "Proud of you, kid. Fly high." Even when I received my medal after a mission, the family didn't come. They were too busy celebrating Serena's engagement. I gripped the edge of the counter. The scent of pine resin drifted through the cracked window, the wind brushing across the open field where the horses used to graze. Cedar Hollow had been my grandfather's fortress, and now it was mine. Looking out over the hills, I realized that message wasn't a surprise. It was a confirmation. They had drawn the line, and for the first time, I didn't feel like chasing it. I felt something steadier, sharper control. I pulled the old leather notebook my grandfather had left me off the shelf. Its first page was still blank. With a pen pressed deep into the paper, I wrote the title like a mission order: Operation Cedar Hollow, 4-7. No begging, no squeezing into a chair at someone else's table. I would build my own. A table long enough for anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. I closed the notebook and slid it back across the counter, my reflection still faint in the glass. A question pulsed at the edge of my thoughts. Why had they gone out of their way to exclude me this time? And what exactly were they planning to celebrate in Denver? In the corner of the kitchen sat one of Theo's old wooden crates. On top, sealed tight with a strip of yellowed tape, lay a parcel with my name in his handwriting. Across the front open, "Only when you're truly ready." My fingers hovered over it, but I turned away. Not yet. The next morning, the light was sharp and blue, the kind of Wyoming sky my grandfather used to call flying weather. I opened his notebook and began sketching out what looked less like a family holiday and more like a military campaign. Timeline: 4 days. Mission host: a 4th of July at Cedar Hollow. Resources: the old barn tables, Evie's jam and wine, Caleb's tools, Micah's steady hands, Lila's fire for storytelling, Elliot's bourbon. Risks: weather, fire, safety, unexpected interference. Contingency plans: tents, backup grills, and the ability to adapt. I wrote the names carefully: Evie, Caleb, Lila, Micah, Elliot, and then left one last line blank. Beside it, I scrawled, "For anyone who needs a seat." It felt right. Instead of a text or an email, I pulled out thick stationery embossed with cedar leaves and wrote invitations by hand. My pen scratched across the paper like it had purpose. Each note sealed with wax, each envelope carried down the drive to the post box. Not technology, not another cold message, something human, warm, impossible to delete. By the afternoon, I was pulling furniture from the barn, dusting off old chairs, scraping down the rough planks of a table that had once hosted hay bales. Cedar Hollow was coming alive. I sanded the porch rails, tested the outdoor fireplace, dragged out the tent poles, checked the grill. I opened the shed tarp's first aid kits, a fire extinguisher. Caleb confirmed by phone he'd reinforce the road and post signs to guide guests. He warned me about wind shifts from the north that could turn fireworks into danger. I added Plan B: cold spark fireworks or none at all. The confirmations rolled in like relief. Evie called first, her voice warm, steady. She promised to bring jam wine and something else she wouldn't name until the night before. Caleb said he'd handle the driveway and bring bread. Lila left me a voice note full of laughter, suggesting a game she called Truth or Freedom to make the evening lively, and she'd bring candles to line the table. Micah texted short and sure, "I'll cover supplies. Don't worry." Elliot wrote last, his tone more loaded, "I'll bring the bourbon. You'll see why." That night, as I set the notebook on the counter, my phone rang. Kelsey's name lit up. Her voice cracked as she told me Willow had been crying. My niece had overheard her grandmother saying I wasn't invited. Willow told her mom, "At Aunt Serena's, I'm always told to sit at the kids' table and keep quiet. I want to go to Aunt Zin's." Kelsey sent me a photo, Willow's drawing in bright markers a banner reading Aunt Zin's Independence Day. I pressed the paper against my chest, suddenly grateful for the quiet house. Later, just as the sky turned purple, headlights swept across the porch. No one knocked. When I opened the door, an envelope lay on the step, plain and unmarked. Inside was a set of screenshots from our family group chat. The version sent to me read, "This year, just your sister's family." But in the unsent draft attached, my mother had typed "Invite only Serena's family," plus Serena's guests for the announcement. The word announcement cut into me like a hidden blade. What were they planning to reveal in Denver that required me to be absent? I wrote it down in the notebook under Risk's family's secret agenda. Unknown objective. High stakes. I stepped out onto the porch. The mountains silhouetted against the night and let the Wyoming wind sting my face. The sealed package from my grandfather waited inside, but I wasn't ready to open it. Not yet. I wanted to prove I could fly this mission on my own wings before turning to his last words. I went out to the barn to clear a shelf and ended up clearing a decade from my chest. Dust lifted in slow spirals where the light cut through the slats. On the lowest plank behind a coil of frayed rope, I found an old tin box, the kind my grandfather used for spare bolts and pocket change. The lid protested, then gave. Inside were neat bundles of envelopes tied with twine, a thin notebook scuffed at the corners, and one spare envelope with my name on it in Theo's hard, loyal handwriting. The letters were addressed to my grandmother, all dates spanning years I barely remember. Theo had written in ink that never wavered. He told her about rain on the tin roof, about the hawk that circled the ridge like a sentry, about money he was quietly setting aside, about how a place can hold a person steady when the world is bent on pushing. Between the small domestic notes, he kept returning to the same refrain in a house where everyone fights for the spotlight. The one who runs the backstage keeps the show from falling apart. He didn't dress it up, he meant me. He used my name without apology, said he'd seen me carry weight. No one else noticed, said it counted even when the family acted like it didn't. Tucked beneath those letters was the little notebook pages full of practical lists and the philosophy he taught me without sermons. Build the table you wish existed. Seat people who've been told to stand. Check your wind, check your fuel. Check your fire. He'd outlined exactly how to host an outdoor gathering in a dry Wyoming summer, water barrels staged at each corner, hose lines run, and tested a shovel by every pit, extinguishers loaded and easy to grab. Not poetry, but maybe the purest kind, love expressed as preparation. At the bottom of the stack waited 2 envelopes. One was thin and labeled in crisp script, Zinnia, never let anyone decide your seat. I didn't open it. Not yet. The other was addressed to my mother, Judith. It wasn't posted, only drafted. I unfolded it and read what Theo had never mailed. He confronted her calmly, directly, about pressing him to shift the inheritance and place Cedar Hollow in Serena's name. He laid out why the land should stay with the person who understood its work, rather than its image, who would keep it a haven instead of a trophy. He didn't flatter or scold. He stated facts, and he invoked the kind of future he wanted the place to have: quiet, steady, open. The letter ended unsigned, a draft abandoned, or a warning he decided to carry in person and never did. I sat on the cool floorboards with those pages open across my knees, hearing the barn creak around me. So this wasn't new. The current snaking through my family had been running beneath our feet for years, shaping decisions, rewriting invitations, trimming rooms until only one daughter fit the frame. When I lifted the last layer of paper, a small membership card slid free. Veterans of Foreign Wars, with Theo's name and a penciled note along the edge. Give to Elliot when the day is right. I turned it over, half expecting more, and found a second penciled line, faint smudged. He'll know how to carry what you shouldn't. Elliot, my teammate, was tangled in this long before I realized it. I thought of his message about bringing a bourbon bottle with history. I drew a red circle around July 4th on the wall calendar. When I got back to the kitchen, the ink bleeding into the paper like a promise. I went to the notebook and wrote my pact in dark lines. No Denver. No public fight. I will speak with a table long enough to hold anyone they ever sidelined. Under that, I set measurable anchors, guest count, menu, safety rules, timing for fireworks if the wind behaved, plan C if it didn't, assembly points if we had to shelter or put anything out. It felt like setting a runway with flares, and then checking each one twice. I called Evie and told her only the bare minimum, that I'd found a box of letters and some lists. She was quiet for a long time, then said she'd bring something on the night before the 4th. Something I should have seen long ago. Caleb texted that the road was leveled and packed, and he'd staked simple direction signs at the turnoff. Lila sent over a list of prompts for her game: truth or freedom, each one simple enough to answer and wide enough to reveal something real. Micah had borrowed a second grill. The logistics clicked. The river underneath kept moving. I placed the tin box on the kitchen table and underlined a short line in Theo's notebook: care is a verb. The house held that sentence like a vow. The barn tin clinked shut. When I stepped back outside, a wind beat against the porch screen hard enough to rattle the latch, and a long gray ribbon of cloud pulled over the ridge from the north. I wrote weather risk in the margin of my plan and closed the book. The sealed parcel on the counter caught the light. I looked at it for a long moment and left it unopened. The days before the 4th sharpened into a rhythm that felt like flying: constant checks, calm voices, a steady hand on the controls. Caleb and I raised the backup tent and ran power lines for the string lights, testing the bulbs one by one until the porch glowed like a small town square. Evie and Willow arrived mid-morning with a box of folded napkins and 3 jars of strawberry jam sealed tight with paraffin. We spread the long table with a clean, runner-counted chairs, and Willow insisted on folding each napkin into a star, her tongue between her teeth in concentration. I let her choose where each star would sit. She put one in front of my plate and wrote my name on a card she decorated with tiny blue fireworks. Micah showed up with a pickup bed of supplies and a coil of caution tape he wanted to use to mark our safe radius. He checked the fireworks I'd planned, with me simple, legal, nothing grand. Our county required spacing extinguishers and a permit, and I'd already filed the paperwork. He walked me through a dry run on the timing and made me practice reaching for the extinguishers until muscle memory took over. Elliot came last set, a heavy, dark glass bottle at the center of the table without a word, and ran his thumb along the seam in its base like you'd check a weld. "It belongs here," he said. "We'll talk when it's time." Lila roamed with her camera, snagging small moments, the light across Willow's cheek, Evie tying a ribbon at the end of the table, Caleb kneeling to adjust a tent stake, Micah chalking a line to mark our safety boundary. "I'm writing about belonging," she said, "and about how a meal can be a declaration." She kept the lens turned outward, never intrusive, as if she understood this was not content, but witness. By afternoon, news traveled the way it does in towns like ours. Serena posted a photo from my parents' backyard in Denver, rented arch white chairs, lanterns in a row. The caption read, "The Real Carver Celebration, Exclusive Only." She didn't tag me, but enough mutuals did. My phone lit up with messages from people I knew in passing and people I thought were gone for good. "Is this for attention?" one old friend asked. "Are you trying to make a point?" I typed and deleted half a dozen responses before I set the phone down. The wind pushed against the tent and snapped the canvas like a flag. I walked the line of the table and pressed each chair leg into the ground until they felt anchored to the earth. Late in the day, a dark SUV idled at the gate just long enough to be noticed. A window rolled down, a camera blinked, and the car slid away. Minutes later, a message arrived from Serena: "Stop the spectacle. Mom and Dad won't let this stand." The words tasted like exhaust. I took another lap around the property, tracing the gravel, counting the distances we'd measured earlier, letting the math quiet the part of me that wanted to answer fast and loud. When I finished, I wrote 2 lines in the notebook: "Respond with safety. Respond with hospitality." It settled me. I found Willow on the porch steps with Evie's sweater around her shoulders. Her face was blotchy, eyes shining, small fists in her lap. Kelsey stood behind her phone, pressed tight to her chest. "She overheard your mother," Kelsey said, and her voice had a sorry in it. "That wasn't for me. They told me Willow shouldn't come, that she belongs with her real family today." Willow swallowed. "I want to be here," she said, not a plea, but a pledge. I sat next to her and told her a simple truth. At this table, no one is ever asked to be quiet or small. We made a place card with her name in big letters. She put it down herself. As evening pulled the light away, the property looked like a map of intentions. The path from the drive to the table marked in lanterns, the grill scrubbed and covered, the fire pit ringed with a second hose. Caleb checked the stakes once more and muttered about the wind turning north after sunset. We tested the lights again. The bulbs bloomed one by one in that steady, home-baked way that doesn't need applause. Lila asked to take one last photo, and I said yes, but only of hands. Evie's flour-dusted fingers tightening the table runner, Caleb's knuckles grazed from work. Micah's ink-stained checklist, Elliot's loose grip on the bottle's neck. Willow's small palm smudged with marker stars, and mine steadying the candle in the center like it might tip. The frame held what mattered: labor, not performance. Afterward, Lila stood quiet for a beat. "This is what freedom looks like when it isn't loud," she said. When the sky went indigo, I walked out to the gate alone and closed the chain gently, leaving it unlatched for those who were welcome. The gravel carried the memory of that SUV's tires, but the night felt ours. Somewhere beyond the ridge, music drifted thin from a ranch party. I could almost hear my mother's voice, practice composed, setting a program in Denver. I didn't wish to join, and the relief of that came clean and hot like breath after a sprint. Back in the kitchen, I wrote the only conclusion the day allowed: confrontation is inevitable. On the next line, I printed the words with the care of a flight plan. July 4th, Cedar Hollow, all in. Then I blew out the candle and stood in the doorway a while, listening to the wind comb the grass, and knew the house could feel my heart slow to the cadence of a countdown I was finally ready to keep. The morning of the 4th began with clear skies, the air sharp and bright over the ridge. I walked through Cedar Hollow, counting chairs, checking ribbons, running my hand over the rough wood of the long table, as if its grain could steady me. One by one, my guests arrived, arms full of food, wine, and laughter. Evie was first, pulling me into an embrace that smelled like flower and lavender, pressing jars of strawberry jam into my hands. Caleb came next with fresh bread and a toolbox still in his truck bed. Lila brought candles and that restless sparkle in her eyes, her camera already hanging at her side. Micah unloaded a cooler without ceremony, but his nod carried the weight of trust. Elliot appeared last, the bourbon bottle cradled in his hand, like it contained more than amber liquid, his eyes saying what he hadn't yet. Then Kelsey's car pulled in, Willow hopping out before it even stopped, her arms full of the poster she'd drawn. Aunt Zin's Independence Day, she announced, the colors smeared where her fingers had dragged across the marker lines. She insisted on placing it at the center of the table, and for a moment it felt like the truest decoration we had. Kelsey hesitated at the edge of the yard, phone buzzing in her hand, but Willow had already claimed her seat. No one could move her. Soon the neighbors began arriving, drawn by rumor and the promise of barbecue. They carried pies, salads, jugs of iced tea, their presence casual yet grounding. The table filled with dishes and voices, the scent of grilled corn mixing with the resin of the pines. For a brief moment, Cedar Hollow lived the way I had imagined it, open, belonging, free. That's when the black SUV rolled to a stop at the gate. The engine idled, then cut. My mother and father stepped out, Raymond in a pressed shirt despite the heat, Judith with her lips pursed like she'd swallowed something sour. They didn't glance at the food or the table or the guests. Their eyes went straight to Willow. "We're here to take her home," Judith said, voice carrying across the grass like an order. I met them on the porch, each step deliberate. "She's already home," I said, steady. Behind me, Willow pressed closer to Evie's side. "Cedar Hollow is mine. It's where she belongs if she chooses." For a beat, no one spoke. The wind filled the silence, rustling through the lanterns strung above us. Then my phone buzzed. Serena's face filled the screen, her voice amplified through the speaker as she laughed, a sharp, practiced sound. "Look at you, Zin, playing hostess like you belong. Everyone knows you're the outsider." She meant it to sting, to humiliate me before the crowd. But Willow snatched the phone, her small voice ringing louder than any of ours. "Aunt Zin's party is better. Nobody forgets me here." The hush that followed was heavier than stone. Serena's smirk faltered before the call cut. Elliot moved closer, uncorking the bourbon. He poured a measure into 2 glasses, handed one to me, then held the bottle up for all to see. "Did you know your grandfather left more than whiskey in here?" His thumb pressed at the base until the glass gave way, revealing a small, rolled slip inside. My breath caught. Proof, maybe. A safeguard. But before I could take it, Judith's hand shot forward faster than her years suggested. She snatched the paper, shoved it into her purse, her face set in iron. The air felt like it might split open. Then, without warning, flakes began to drift down, slow and white, settling on the shoulders of guests and the dark earth alike. Snow in the heat of July. People gasped, staring upward as if heaven itself had blessed Cedar Hollow. Willow laughed and stuck out her tongue to catch a flake. Evie whispered that it was Theo's way of saying he was still here. I believed her. Judith shook her head, her mouth align. Coincidence. Don't turn this into a miracle. But no one listened. Every face was lifted to the sky, and in that moment I knew the ground had shifted beneath her feet. I stepped forward, my voice carrying clear. At this table, no one is forgotten. No one is asked to shrink. Here, no one is left behind. Later in my journal, I wrote the words that echoed through my chest. The battle has begun. Not in the air, not with weapons, but here on the wood of Cedar Hollow's table. As the sun dipped and the lanterns glowed warm along the table, the guests gathered around the outdoor fireplace. Lila suggested we begin the game she'd brought, truth or freedom. One by one, people spoke, voices mingling with the crackle of firewood. Caleb admitted he once burned a batch of bread so badly he had to bury it in the garden. Lila shared she was grateful never to spend another holiday under a boss who saw her as furniture. Willow, cheeks pink from the firelight, unfolded a large sheet of paper she'd worked on all afternoon. My real family Independence Day. She had drawn each of us at the long table, names written in colored marker, my figure placed squarely in the center. She set it down in the middle of the table, and no decoration could have shone brighter. The laughter and warmth hung thick when headlights swept up the drive. A man in a courier's uniform walked forward asking for me. He handed me an envelope and left without a word. I slid it open under the lantern glow and read. It was a preliminary summons, legal papers filed by Serena and my parents. They were petitioning to have Cedar Hollow removed from my name, arguing I was unfit to keep the inheritance, that the estate should pass to Serena. The fire seemed to snap louder in the silence that followed. Eyes turned to me, measuring, waiting. Elliot leaned near, his voice low. The paper in the bourbon, it's a codicil. Theo's addition to the will. It could end this. But it's in your mother's hands now. His words struck like flares in a night sky, bright but distant. Micah, steady as always, broke the silence. Then we get it back. Before morning. His tone carried no hesitation, only the practicality of a soldier planning for dawn. Evie reached across the table, her hand trembling only slightly as she pulled a folded sheet from her bag. Your grandfather knew this might happen, she said. I saw Judith tear up a letter years ago. I kept a copy. She laid it in front of me. Theo's handwriting, bold and certain, declared that Cedar Hollow was meant for me, not Serena. His reason was written plain, because Zinnia knows how to build her own table. My chest tightened, the words both wound and balm. Before I could breathe, the phone rang again. Serena's face lit the screen projected across the table as if she were sitting there herself. She didn't waste time. Tomorrow in Denver, I'll be announcing the sale of Cedar Hollow to the investors. The deal is nearly done. This charade of yours doesn't matter. Her smile was a blade. The guests around me inhaled sharply. I saw it then. This gathering, this estate, this family I had built around me was the last obstacle between them and their plan to cash in what Theo had protected. My party wasn't a sideshow. It was the barricade. The fire popped, sparks rising into the black Wyoming sky. I reached for Willow's drawing and set it upright against the lantern. This, I said, my voice carrying over the flames, is what family looks like. Not a contract, not a sale, not an invitation that can be revoked. This is the truth. The flames crackled as if in answer, casting light across the guests' faces, their eyes bright, unflinching. Inside, I thought of the sealed envelope still resting on my kitchen counter, the one labeled in Theo's hand. Open only when you're truly ready. I wasn't ready before. Now I was beginning to wonder if tomorrow would leave me no choice. In my notebook, I wrote the only line that fit tomorrow. I either lose everything or I prove it was mine, all along. By nightfall, Cedar Hollow glowed like a beacon. Lanterns swung from the trees, the long table shimmered under rows of candles, and Willow's drawing claimed its place in the center like a flag no storm could rip down. The air was sharp, a chill riding on the summer wind, flakes of snow drifting from a sky too dark for July. Guests huddled in jackets borrowed from cars, murmuring about the strangeness of it, calling it a blessing, a sign. The fireworks were set waiting at the far edge of the meadow. I had rehearsed the sequence with Micah until I could do it blind, but before the first spark struck, headlights slashed across the gravel drive. Out stepped Judith and Raymond, flanking a man in a dark suit carrying a leather case. Their lawyer. They crossed the lawn as though the place belonged to them, ignoring the murmurs, ignoring the guests. The lawyer snapped open the case and read out the formal summons declaring that Cedar Hollow was in dispute and would soon belong to Serena. Serena herself appeared, her face filling a phone screen held high by one of her friends, her voice amplified over the speaker. Tomorrow, she declared, Cedar Hollow will be sold. The real family doesn't have room for outsiders. Her words rang against the night, brittle and sharp. I felt my chest tighten, but before I could step forward, Elliot did. He held up the old VFW card I had seen in the tin box, turning it under the lantern light. Your grandfather trusted me, he said. With practiced fingers, he peeled back a flap of worn paper to reveal a slip hidden beneath. In Theo's hand, clear and certain, Cedar Hollow belongs to Zin. No one can take that away. The lawyer sputtered, called it inadmissible, tried to wave it off, but Evie rose, her voice cutting clean. She placed her own document on the table, the copy of the letter Judith once destroyed, the one naming me as the rightful heir. The truth stood there in ink and memory, unshakable. Judith's face hardened. She reached for Willow, trying to pull her close. She belongs with her blood, she snapped. But Willow clung to me, eyes, fierce voice carrying across the meadow. Aunt Zin is my real family. Every sound stilled. Even the wind seemed to pause. It wasn't a legal argument. It was something truer. Serena's voice broke through again, shrill from the phone. She was rattled, angry, and in her fury she slipped. Of course I told Mom to edit the message, she hissed. Zin didn't need to know about the announcement. She was never supposed to. Gasps rose from the table, the admission falling into the night like a flare. Her own words betrayed her. I rose steady now and felt the silence stretch wide enough for every ear to hear. Cedar Hollow is mine, I said, my voice calm, carrying. Not to flaunt, not to sell, but to build a table long enough for anyone who's ever been left out. That's what it means to inherit. That's what it means to belong. Micah struck the first match. Fire streaked upward, exploding into color. Red, gold, blue cascaded over the meadow, reflecting in the dark waters of the lake. The sound drowned out the protests. The crackle erased the shouts. Judith and Raymond turned away, defeated, their lawyer silent at their side. Serena's face flickered once on the phone before the screen went black. I wrapped my arms around Willow, her hair damp with snow and smoke, her heart beating hard against mine. Above us, the sky blazed in defiance, 1,000 sparks declaring what no voice could deny. Still, my eyes slid to the kitchen window where the sealed envelope waited. I knew the night wasn't done until I opened it. When the meadow finally quieted, when the fireworks were only echoes in the mountains, guests began to drift away. Their laughter lingered like embers in the dark. Evie hugged me tight. Caleb promised to check the road tomorrow. Lila whispered that she would write the truth as it happened. Micah packed up the last of the equipment. By the time the lanterns dimmed, only Elliot, Willow, and I remained, gathering plates, folding cloth, carrying the weight of silence together. Snow fell thicker now, soft and steady, laying a white veil over the grass. The meadow looked reborn, a clean page written by the sky. Willow's cheeks glowed red as she ran through the flakes, laughing in bursts of steam. I carried the envelope inside, set it on the table, and pressed my hand flat against it. My grandfather's script stared back open, only when you're truly ready. I tore it open with a breath that shook. Inside was a single sheet, the paper rough, but his words clear. If you are reading this, you chose to stand. You chose not to beg. Cedar Hollow is not soil and wood. It is proof that you can define family on your own terms. Don't ever wait for a chair at someone else's table. Build your own, and build it long enough for others who need a place. My eyes blurred. Beneath the letter lay a photograph, edges curled, colors fading. It was me as a child standing on the porch in summer light. My smile wide, the family behind me turned in other directions. On the back, Theo had scrawled, "You are the light. Don't let anyone's back turn you into shadow." The sob rose before I could stop it. For the first time in years, I cried without shame. Elliot stepped closer, his voice quiet. Before he passed, your grandfather asked me to look after this place. He said you'd need someone who knew what loyalty meant. I owed him. He once pulled me out of a hole no one else could. Protecting Cedar Hollow was the only way to pay it forward. I looked at him and realized Theo had built me a squad long before I thought I had one. He'd ensured I would never fight this alone. When I stepped back outside, Willow was standing by the hearth inside the house, her drawing pinned above it. My real family Independence Day. The paper looked fragile, but it held stronger than any contract. Around it, laughter from earlier seemed to linger like a blessing. Evie's promise, Caleb's steady help, Lila's words, Micah's silence, Elliot's loyalty, my family chosen and sure. I no longer feared the rejection of those who had left me behind. I had found something better, people who chose me freely. The estate didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a vow. I walked onto the porch. Snowflakes gathered in my hair, melted on my lips. The lake mirrored the last sparks of the fireworks, colors rippling across the surface as if the night itself refused to close. I whispered into the cold air, "Fly high, Grandpa." I built the table. Behind me, Cedar Hollow glowed warm, the windows golden, the door waiting. The house wasn't just a structure anymore. It was a fortress of spirit, a beacon for anyone who needed to know they belonged. The snow kept falling, not as a burden but as a renewal, wrapping the land in white as if declaring that tomorrow was already a new beginning. And when I closed the door, the warmth met me like an embrace, the kind you don't question, the kind you finally believe you deserve.